The chauffeur of the Queen's limousine was as good as his word and reversed out of the auditorium through the gateway in which he had arrived. I was glad to be wearing my much deplored outfit, because wearing it, the chauffeur had no fears that I was any sort of terrorist. No terrorist would be seen wearing an outfit like that. The reason I couldn't let the car drive round the perimeter of the arena was because I knew that dotted around the perimeter at strategic intervals were groups of young people with huge nets which they were going to pull into the centre of Pride Park. And the cue that they had for doing that was when the Queen had been greeted and took her seat. And sadly, with our little earpieces not being reliable, I couldn't know that the chaperones keeping the children under control would hear anything but frantic fizzing if I tried to send a message. The Queen took her seat, and the arena suddenly was filled with young people and monstrous nets, and in each net there were hundreds of golden balloons, helium balloons. One balloon for each day of the Queen's reign. 365 times 50. That's a lot of balloons. And the young person in charge of each team had a release mechanism, and when that was pulled, the nets opened and the balloons floated free. Now, each balloon had on it a string about 18 inches long, and on the bottom of the string a tag. And the idea was that the balloons, when released, would fly out over Derby and would eventually deflate and land, and if anyone picked up the tag and returned it to the organisers, the tag that went the furthest would get a significant prize. The balloons, however, couldn't be stored outside without getting sopping wet, and there was nowhere big enough to store them inside. We're talking about nets of huge volume. All of the balloons that had been on the outer side of the nets had tags that were absolutely sopping wet. All of the balloons that were safely in the middle of the nets had totally dry tags, and all of the balloons that had been neither in the middle nor on the outer edge had damp tags. So what happened? The balloons were released from their nets. Some of them floated upwards, some of them soared upwards, some of them stayed not quite on the ground, but just the distance off the ground of the lengths of string that they were attached to. The effect was amazing, because the ones that flew free looked splendid as they took flight into the ether. The ones on the ground looked like flowers all over the white pitch, and the ones that were neither up nor down made a golden roof that covered the pitch up to where the auditorium covers were. It was quite splendid. I am told, on good authority, the Lord Lieutenant, that the Queen was very impressed. She smiled and said, "That must have taken someone a lot of work." Of course, she knew what she meant. It was quite stunning. The whole afternoon was quite stunning, and the first thing that got stunned was all the balloons on the ground, because someone had had the forethought to equip the young people with a pin each so that they could prick the balloons that were on the ground before they left the arena. Otherwise, they would have been there like flowers for the whole of the rest of the afternoon. One or two of the events didn't actually happen. The county wind band did not play. Getting expensive woodwind instruments sopping wet is not a good idea. But on the other hand, some Asian drummers who had been going to play to keep the audience entertained before they entered Pride Park were summoned, because they were all still there, and played absolutely magnificently in the spot in the programme where the wood band would have been entertaining. And when I said I hoped that their instruments were not damaged, the leader of the team smiled at me and said, "They're made of cow skin. The cows will have got wet lots of times." A very philosophical attitude. One group that will stay in my mind forever were a group of men who were going to do an act like the Keystone Cops, a comic act, comic policemen. And when the right bit of music came for it to be their turn, I said, "Right, you're on now." And their leader said, "Do you mean us?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "You mean in the middle of the arena?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "When's that then?" And I said, "Now. Go now." "Oh, right. Come on, lads, we're on now." That was all the rehearsal in the morning. When they came off, he said, "Oh, that was good fun." He said, "But we'll be in costume this afternoon. You won't recognise us." And I said, "I think I will know who you are." When it came to their moment in the afternoon, I said, "Right, you're on now." And he said, "Do you mean us?" And I said, "Yes, you." And he said, and when are we going?" I said, "You're going now. Now." And when they were performing, and they were indeed very funny, I looked on my list to see what the official title of the group were. They were Derbyshire's Rapid Response Unit. I had another note on my programme which was dogs. It said something like, sheepdogs at 2:57, police dogs at 2:59, dogs for the blind at 2:31, carer dogs at 2:33. The dogs were magnificent. They all did exactly what they were meant to do at the time that it said on the list. I did get one urgent announcement handed to me on a soggy bit of paper, and it said, "Would I please sort out heavy equipment?" What? How was I, albeit I had two helpers, going to sort out heavy equipment? And what heavy equipment? I was stumped. Until a very underclad black chap with Rastafarian dreadlocks comes up, and he was in constant movement. And I said, "Hello?" And he said, "Whoa, bro." And I think that means hello. And I said, "Are you one of the acrobatic team?" And he said, "Oh, yes, darling, I am." And I said, "I gather that you use heavy equipment." And he said, "Oh, darling, I am heavy equipment." I had no comment to make to that, but it did explain to me that I had to sort out heavy equipment because I had to prompt he and his acrobats that it was now their moment of glory. Heavy Equipment was the group's name. they were magnificent and brave, because leaping over gym boxes and doing vaults and landing, albeit on gym mats, but gym mats that were covered in water, I do not know how they didn't injure themselves. When we got through to the end, 2 people stood out because of their ability to use the sound equipment in a way which people could understand. One of the 2 people was the Queen. She spoke slowly and clearly, and everyone could understand every word. Many of the people who used the microphones produced a lot of volume and boom, but no articulation that was audible, with the rain pounding down on the roof of the covered stands and the noise of all of the people. There was at the end an occasion when the royal party walked up a line of the performers. One of my performers was dressed in the costume she had worn in Kismet, which was diaphanous when dry, and when wet, very clingy and practically invisible to the eye. The Duke of Edinburgh peered at her and said, "It looks rather wet down there." Was he really looking at her décolletage? Well, he might have been. The next night, we had a rehearsal of the musical group that performs and rehearses at my home, and that young woman was one of my performers. And my husband had, in the meantime, made a spoof certificate, and it said that it was for purveyor of titillation to the titled, a royal warrant. The last time I visited her, it was hanging, as it has done for many years, in her house downstairs lavatory. It was a wonderful event, and the Queen looked glorious and smiled throughout, and the performers were determined that no rain was going to, in any way, put a downer on a celebration of which we were all proud. It's been fun remembering that day and sharing it with you. Thank you. Bye-bye.